Okay. Okay. Parshas Savo. Of course, Parshas Savo starts talking about Bikurim and about Hagrizin, Harevo, and then the Tochacha, the brachos and the klolos, the blessings and the curses, and the Torah at the end. The part the Baal HaMasorah, he always counts the number of psukim in a sedra, and he has a word that has the numerical value. He suggests a word that has the numerical value of the number of psukim, of the number of verses in the particular parsha. And that word is always has some relationship with the topic or one of the topics of the Sedra. And the Baal Masorah at the end of Parshas Savo says that there are 122 verses, 122 psukim in Parshas Savo. And he says that's equal numerically to the word la'avodav. In other words, we have a rule of gematrios, and we learn certain drashos on the basis of the gematrios. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, etc., etc. So if you take the word la'avodav, the word la'avodav, to his servants, so that's equal to 122. And he says that word la'avodav corresponds with 122 psukim, the 122 verses in the Sedra of Savo. Now, I want to consider the question: what is the relationship between the word la'avodav to his servants and Parshas Savo? And I noticed that in the Art Scroll Stone Chumashim, they mention in the name of Reb David Feinstein, Zechet Tzaddik Levracha, an explanation. He says, at least the way it's mentioned in Art Scroll, the Menamic means to his servants an allusion to the admonition, the purpose of which was to solidify the Jewish people as God's servants. So he feels that it's related to the klolos, to the curses that are mentioned at the end of the Sedra. At the end of the Sedra, we are told that if we will be committed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we do what God tells us to do, and we will act properly, so we'll get many brachos, we will get many blessings. But assuming chas v'shalom, v'im lo sishmuli, God says, if you will not listen to me, you will not hearken to my voice, and you will not do what I command you, so there will be one tragedy after another tragedy. And that we identify as the klolos, as the tochacha. So Reb David Feinstein felt that the idea of la'avodav, to be his servants, was connected directly with the revelation that if we do not do the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we do not commit ourselves to his service, that the purpose of this is for us, in a sense, to give us a push, to commit ourselves to his service, to be in his service, to be his servants, la'avada. And I want to follow that approach, but I think it's more general. It's not just talking about the tochacha, but I think it's also talking about the brachos, the rewards, the good life that we will have if we observe the Torah, if we are committed to God, and if we follow in the directions that he gives us. Now, in order to explain this, I want to make mention of something in regard to tefillin. Everybody knows that there is a dispute between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam in the order of the parshios of the tefillin. Rashi Shita, Rashi's opinion is that the tefillin, the four part, regarding the four parshios of the tefillin contain in them 4 paragraphs from the Torah. The first 2 are at the end of Parshas Bo. It deals with the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt. It deals with some mitzvos related to the exodus. It reminds us about the exodus and emphasizes how we have to remember the exodus from Egypt, our going from slavery to liberation. And those 2 parshas, the first word of one is Kadesh, and the other is V'haya Kibiyacha. But there are 2 additional parshios that are in the tefillin. And those parshios, those paragraphs of the Torah, are found in Chumash Dvarim, the very last book of the 5 books of the Torah. One is in Hashana, that's the parsha of Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, together with V'ahavta. And the second parsha is in Parshas Eiken, V'hayim Shemoah, the second parsha of Shema. And according to Rashi, these parshios are in the order that they are in the Torah. First Kadesh, and then V'haya K'biyacha, then Shema, and then V'hayim Shemoah. The order they're put in the tefillin corresponds with the order that they are in the Torah. And that seems to be very logical. Why should it be a different order? However, the simple reading, Rashi doesn't read the Gemara in the simple way, but the simple reading of the Gemara in Menachos indicates that we have Kadesh first, V'haya Kibiyacha second, V'haya Im Shemoah third, and Shema fourth. In other words, it's the order of the parshios in the Torah the order of the Parshios and the Tefillin do not correspond with the order that the Parshios are in the Torah. For some reason, in the Torah, Shema comes before V'hayim Shemoah. But in the Tefillin, at least where it's placed, not necessarily in the order that it's written, but in the where it's placed in the Tefillin. So you have Kadesh first, V'hayik V'yacha second, V'hayim Shemoah third, and Shema last. And the question is, so Rabbeinu Tam therefore says that since the simple reading of the Gemara indicates that the Parshios are positioned in the Tefillin, not in accordance with the order it's in the Torah. So in the Tefillin, the order of the Parshios do not correspond with the way it's in the Torah. Rashi obviously felt that in view of the fact that logic dictates that the tefillin should be in the order that it's in the Torah, so therefore we have to explain the Gemara not in its simple meaning, in accordance with its simple meaning, but that we have to explain the Gemara that it means to mean that it's in the order of the Parshios of the Torah. In any case, so Rabbeinu Tam, in a sense, was motivated by the simple reading of the Gemara. Rashi was motivated by the logical approach, and therefore he explained the Gemara not in accordance with its simple meaning. Now we have to understand, okay, we understand why Rabbeinu Tam felt that the tefillin is not in the order of the Torah, because the simple reading of the Gemara in Menachos indicated that the tu v'haya, Kebiyacha, which is the end of bow, is followed immediately by V'hayim Shemoah, which in the Torah comes after Shema. And only after that is the parsha of Shema placed in the tefillin. So we have to understand from a logical perspective. Yes, true. The simple reading of the Gemara indicates that in the tefillin, the parshios, the paragraphs of the Torah that are placed in the tefillin are not in the order that they are in the Torah. But what's the rationale for it? What's the logic for it? Now, there is a discussion brought in the Rishonim. Now, I mentioned the first two parshios, Kadesh v'Hayik Biyacha. That's mentioned in at the end of Parshas Bo, almost at the beginning of Chumash Shemos. The Jewish people had not yet left Egypt. They were on their way out of Egypt. And they received the mitzvah tefillin, and they were told about two of the parshios, two of the four parshios that would be in the tefillin. But when it came, and the last two parshios are mentioned at the end of Chumash Dvarim. Chumash Dvarim is talking at the time when the Jewish people are completing their trip in the desert that lasted 40 years. But there was a discrepancy of about 40 years So they received the mitzvah tefillin at the time of the Exodus, but they seemingly did not yet have all the parshios that was to be put into the tefillin. So how could they have fulfilled the mitzvah tefillin as they were going out of Egypt if they did not have all the 4 parshios in their tefillin? If somebody does not have all 4 parshios in the tefillin, he doesn't fulfill the mitzvah. And in the Rishonim, we find 2 approaches to answer this question. One approach is that even Shema and Vahayim Shemoah, the parshios that we find in the Torah, at the end, well, at the beginning of Chumash Dvarim and Chumash Dvarim, which is the last book of the Torah, which is identified with the last days of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. Those parshios were actually revealed in Egypt as the Jewish people are leaving Egypt. But in the Torah, it was placed later in the order of the Torah. Consequently, because those 2 parshios were revealed earlier, were revealed in Egypt, it was revealed for the purpose of tefillin. Since it was revealed for the purpose of tefillin, so since it was revealed for the purpose of tefillin, so they had all 4 parshios, so they were able to fulfill the mitzvah tefillin as they were leaving Egypt, or shortly after they left Egypt. However, there is another answer given in the Rishonim, and the other answer is that originally there were only 2 parshios in the tefillin, and then 2 other parshios later on were added to the tefillin. Now, I want to suggest that perhaps we could say that Rabbeinu Tam, in order to explain the Gemara Menachos, that seems to indicate that the parshios in the tefillin were different, are in a different order than they are in the Torah, followed the opinion that all 4 parshios were revealed in Egypt. And while in the Torah, the parsha of Shema comes before Vahaya im Shemoah, when they were revealed in Egypt for the purpose of the tefillin, Vahaya im Shemoah was revealed to them earlier than the parsha of Shema, or right before the parsha of Shema. But that consequently, even though the parshios in the tefillin do not correspond with the order they are in the Torah, but they do correspond with the way they were revealed as the Jewish people were leaving Egypt at the end of Parshas Bo. But we have to understand, why is it that in the tefillin, the parshios, according to Rabbeinu Tam, are based on the revelation that took place in Egypt of Vahayim Shemoah before the Parsha of Shema, and in the Torah and in the mezuzos, Shema is before Vahayim Shemoah. And also, even in the Shema itself, okay, that's so why is it that way? What is it about the mitzvah of tefillin that makes it different? I want to suggest. Now, there are other explanations of Rabbeinu Tam, and I really think that the different explanations of Rabbeinu Tam have to do with all kinds of differences of opinion as to exactly how we are to understand Rabbeinu Tam Shita, whether Rabbeinu Tam differed from Rashi only in the Shal Rosh and not in the Shal Yad or not, and other issues as well. In any case, I think the reason is, when you take a look, matter of fact, there is in Parshas Korach, I once discussed it. In Parshas Korach, Korach had a dispute with Moshe Rabbeinu. One of the questions asked in the Medrash, that right before Parshas Korach, we have the Parsha of Tzitzis. And Moshe, and Parshas Korach, Moshe starts a rebellion. Our sages tell us, what is the connection between the Parsha of Tzitzis and the Parsha and the rebellion of Korach? But Moshe Rabbeinu, Korach said to Moshe Rabbeinu, if you have a talus that is completely blue, it's completely tchelis, does it need tzitzis? And it's interesting, when he phrased the question, Korach didn't say, if you take a look at the exact words, does the strings of the tzitzis have to be tchelis? He asked the question, does it need tzitzis? Korach wanted that if the talus is completely dyed in tchelis, completely blue, it shouldn't need any tzitzis whatsoever. Apparently, Korach felt that if there is no need for a few of the tzitzis to be blue, a few of the strings on the corners to be blue, there's no need for the strings altogether. And he also felt that if the whole beged, the whole cloth is blue, tchelis, so there's no need for blue strings. So if the whole thing is the whole beged, the whole cloth is blue, there's no need for blue strings. And if there's no need for blue strings, there's no need for any strings attached to the talus. And Moshe Rabbeinu told them, of course, the mitzvah of tzitzis applies. And you have to, depending on the shita, some of those tzitzis, some of the strings that are attached to the talus have to be dyed with tcheles, with the blue color. And it was that question that Korach used to start his campaign against Moshe, to ridicule what Moshe said. His argument was, what's the logic for such a thing? But I want to understand from a hashkafa standpoint, what was the argument of Korach? Why was Korach, it seems, matter of fact, the Medrash says that Korach then took 200 palasim and dyed them all blue with chelis. And he put them under Rashi Sanhedrios, people who were leaders in his rebellion, defiantly, without any tzitzis attached to it. What was the point that Korach was trying to make? But we have to understand, what is tchelis? The blue strand. Tchelis domel yam, yam domel rakia. The tchelis and the tzitzis is comparable to the blueness of the sea. The blueness of the sea is comparable to the blueness of the sky or of the heaven. And that the heavens are comparable to the Kisei HaKavod, to the throne of glory, to God's throne. What's the idea behind it? But chelis, the blue color, was the symbol of malchus, of kingship, of royalty. Not just among the Jews. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons suggested for the disuse of chelis was that the Roman government made a decree that only Roman officers could wear tchelis, could use the tchelis. If a Jew used tchelis, they probably would have said that he was part of an insurrection. And we also know when Mordechai HaYehudi, when he went out, dressed in the special royal clothes, when he was appointed as Achashverosh's assistant in place of Haman. So one of the colors he wore was tchelis. And we know tchelis was used in the Big Day Kahuna. So it represented status, position, royalty. But what is the idea of the strings that are attached to the talus? But the idea of the strings that are attached to the talus, it's at four corners. Four corners represents everywhere. Yom HaVakemet, Safota V'Negba, east, west, north, and south. And who is everywhere? God is everywhere. And in a sense, the tzitzis represents our being tied to He who is everywhere, being tied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is tied. A servant is tied to his master. Precautions have to be made that the servant doesn't run away. In a sense, I would suggest we, on one hand, we are the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say Avinu Malkeinu, but we are also the servants of God. We are the children of God. We are royalty. But we're also the servants of God. So many mitzvahs are identified with servitude. And when it comes to servants, there are all kinds of servants. There are servants, Shelo Almanas Lekabel Pras. Servants in the nature, in the form of Abraham Avinu. That whose devotion to his master has nothing to do with reward and punishment. But on a lower level, there's servitude of reward and punishment. And when we take a look at the Parshios of Shema and V'hayim Shemoah, Shema, we take a look at Shema. There is no mention of reward and punishment. Just for hafta, blind love. But V'hayim Shemoah says, if you'll do everything right, Nasati Mitar Tzechem B'ito, your Malkos, you will have rain for your agriculture produce. And you'll be able to eat. But be careful. If you deviate from the path, then God will be angry at you. And there won't be rain. And you will not have any agricultural produce. And you will no longer be able to dwell in the land. So the Shema talks about blind love. It's an emotional attachment, unconditional. V'hayim Shemoah says, if you don't serve me, you're going to be punished. But if you do serve me, everything will be good. And in a sense, we could suggest that V'hayim Shemoah represents the service master relationship between God and the Jewish people. And you see, this was the thing. Korach wanted royalty without servitude. He wanted a beged kulo shel tchelis. He wanted clothes that showed royalty. The strings that are attached to the talis, that represents servitude. Korach didn't want servitude. He wanted royalty. But Moshe said, no. There has to be tchelis on the strings. And there has to be strings. because our royalty goes hand in hand with our servitude. And there is a higher level of servitude and there's a lower level of servitude. There's servitude to be an Eved, Shalom and As L'Kabel Pras. Like Avraham Avinu, but there is a lower level of servitude. Recognition that our survival, our getting sustenance, our able to living a good life or a normal life, to some degree is dependent upon the nature of the service that we do to God. And all of that is contained in V'hayim Shemoah. Shema, there's no reward and punishment. It's unconditional. And the truth of the matter is, we know that Klal Yisrael, at the time of Matan Torah, they said Na'aseh v'nishma. And they were on a level higher than Malachim, a level higher than angels. An angel serves God not because of reward and punishment. He serves God because he serves God. But the Chazal tell us, and this question is raised by all the Rishonim. Gemara in Shabbos tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu picked up Har Sinai over the Jewish people. And he said to the Jewish people, Im tekablu es Torah mutav. If you accept the Torah, it's good. Im lo tekablu es Torah. If you won't accept the Torah, sham tehek furaschem. There you will be buried. So, in a sense, on one hand, the Torah, the Chazal, they all speak about the greatness of the Jewish people, that they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear, putting due compliance before even hearing, before listening. On the other hand, our sages tell us, based on the way they read the psukim, that God held the mountain over the head and said, Sham tehek furaschem, if you don't accept the Torah, there you will be buried. And it's interesting, where Meir Simcha pointed out, it doesn't say Sham tehek furaschem. It doesn't say Po tehek furaschem. Here you will be buried. But Sham tehek furaschem. There you will be buried. In other words, holding over the mountain over them was only symbolic of what will happen to them in the future. But then it's somewhat difficult. What does it mean in tekablu as a Torah if you'll accept the Torah? Acceptance of the Torah was now, not sham, not later. But in any case, the Maharal, I never saw it inside, but I was told years ago, the Maharal says, the Jews accepted the Torah willingly, more than willingly, when they said Na'aseh v'nishma. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to let them know that even though now they want to accept the Torah willingly, there is no choice but to accept the Torah. And according to what we say, the way we can understand it, in the future also, when they accept the Torah, there is no choice. The Jewish people are identified with the Torah. And we can't separate the Torah from the Jewish people. And as much as a Jew will try to separate himself from the Torah, it will be impossible. In a sense, Shamta Hek V'Raschem. If the Kabbalah is a Torah Mutav, if you comply, it'll be good for you. V'nosati Mitar Artzachem. But if you don't accept the Torah, Shamta Hek V'Raschem. And every time that the Jewish people tried to assimilate themselves, ultimately there was a resentment and was Shamta Hek V'Raschem. And unfortunately, many of those who remained committed to the Torah suffered along together with those who were not committed to the Torah. So on one hand, we have to do it out of an emotional attachment to God. We have to accept the mitzvahs out of emotional attachment, but at the same time, we have to understand that there are consequences for not observing the Torah, and there is a reward for accepting the Torah, even though that's not the ideal motive for our compliance. And the Parsha of Shema V'Hayim Shemoah, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Tzitzis represents the fact that we're tied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's not not necessarily the former, it's not just the higher class of servitude, the Avram form of servitude. But it's a lower form of servitude, of recognition that we have no choice. We can't run away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even if Chas v'Shalom we would want to, we are tied to him. Just as the servant is tied to his master, the servant who wants to run away. And I think this is perhaps we could understand on a hashkafa level why, when the tefillin, according to Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, when the parshios of tefillin were given in Egypt to the Jewish people, so V'Haya im Shemoah came after Shema, because it had to do with the self-perception of the Jewish people when he left Egypt. When the Jewish people left Egypt, so when the Jew left Egypt, he saw himself as a slave. And as much as he wanted to demonstrate freedom, ultimately he is a slave. And that's the rebellion, the constant rebellion throughout when they go throughout the desert, when they're leaving Egypt. In a sense, there is a transference. How do they become dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when they see themselves as slaves? In a sense, in their minds, to a certain degree, HaKadosh Baruch Hu replaces Paro. So on one hand, that's how they transfer themselves from the slavery of Egypt to the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On the other hand, we could suggest that one of the major reasons the Jewish people are constantly rebelling against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against God, is because in their mind, this transference takes place. And all the anger they have against Paro is now transferred against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to a certain degree against Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the agent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And sometimes they'll even say, we want to go back to Egypt. But that's what happens in transferences. So there is, if I could use that word, an evolutionary process. It has to do with their self-perception. And unfortunately, throughout our galus, throughout our exile, we see this transference over and over and over again. It's very interesting, the Netziv, in explaining the mitzvah tefillin in Parshas Bo, explaining mitzvahs in general, but specifically tefillin. He says the need for tefillin was, in a sense, the Jewish people had to be felt compelled to become servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rather than being servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they were disposed to be slaves of Paro. So, at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the attitude of the Jewish people at that time was primarily seeing themselves as servants of God. They could not yet see themselves as the children of God. They didn't have that perception. So when they were going out of Egypt for the tefillin, V'hayim Shemoah was given first to them. And only later, but later, I mean, they got Shema. Shema came after that because that represented chronologically the Jewish people going meyavdus lecheres. They went from the servitude of Paro to the servitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then to being the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Parshios of Tefillin, which are identified with the Jewish people going out of Egypt, and specifically it's identified with the Jewish people being servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are tied when we put on the Tefillin. We are tied to the Parshios of the Torah. A servant is tied. So Tefillin is identified with us going from the servitude of Paro into the servitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Consequently, according to Rabbeinu Tam, Shita, we could explain that the V'hayim Shemoah comes before the Shema, because that was the nature of the self-perception of the Jew as he was leaving Egypt and going into the servitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He did not immediately start off with that higher form of servitude. It was the lower form of servitude. V'nasati mitar artzachem, hishamru lachem pen yiftal avavchem. Vavadatem mehera. If you'll act properly, your needs will be taken care of. But if you don't act properly, your needs won't be taken care of. We were on that low madrega. In a sense, the attitude we had to Paro. We had no choice. We had to be his slaves. So when the transference takes place, it starts off with almost that same attitude. And the Vahayim Shmoah comes first. The house does not represent servitude. The mezuzah has the Shema before the Vahayim Shmoah. The Torah, especially the Parshios, put at the end of Dvarim, when the Jewish people reach that level of maturity. They're the Jewish people, to a large degree, have overcome the identification of being slaves of Paro, the effect. Unfortunately, it repeats itself with other people time and time again throughout our Golos. We see people who identify themselves as Jews, but at the same time minimize their support for the Jewish people as an independent nation, because they see themselves as slaves. Slaves of Dumos Olam, slaves of America, slaves of some of the leaders of America. Time and time again, we see ourselves as servants. And sometimes we use that perception of ourselves. We take it out against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, I think that perhaps this is, we as Jews, our royalty, we're the sons of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But our royalty has to go together with our being in his service. And I think that we could understand the La'avadav in this week's Sedra, because this week's Sedra says, if you listen, so you'll have your props and everything will go well. But if you don't listen, the Tochacha, nothing will go well. This Sedra here focuses on the perception of ourselves as servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, things will go well if we do it for the right reasons also. And specifically, I mentioned the question before. Why did it say Sham Tahek Furastem? Okay. I heard from my father, I think the Meshech Chachma also says that there in the future will be your Kfura. So what's the idea there in the future? In the Kabbalah of Torah, if you accept the Torah. Torah was accepted already. What's the Sham? But as we stand before Rosh Hashana, what is tshuva? What is Rosh Hashana? I've discussed it in the past. We know, I mentioned Yom Kippurim is a day of tshuva because of the vidui, the fasting we see. It's a day of tshuva. But how does Rosh Hashana manifest itself as a day of tshuva? And I explained that a Jew who sinned, I said it this year, just 2 weeks ago, I think. A Jew who sinned, in a sense, rejects Sinai. And in rejecting Sinai, he not only rejects the words of Sinai, but he rejects the experience of Sinai. And what was the experience of Sinai? The experience of Sinai was sensing the presence of God. As I mentioned, that when we say the vidui, it's not the vidui of Yom Kippurim, but the vidui during the rest of the year. Ana Hashem, chatasi avisi pashati fenecha. When I sinned before you. I made believe that you weren't there. The experience of Sinai was sensing the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ilu kirvanu lifnei har-Sinai v'lo nasan lanu es ha-Torah dayenu. If you brought us close at Mount Sinai and didn't give us the Torah, that in itself would have been special. Why would it have been special? Because there was revelation. The Jewish people felt close to God. But the Jewish people have to perpetuate that experience. And if we don't perpetuate the experience of Sinai, of sensing the closeness to God, we won't be able to perpetuate. We won't be able to perpetuate the Torah either. The observance of the Torah, the learning of the Torah either. The two have to go hand in hand. That's why before we learn Torah, in the morning, there's a Birchas HaTorah. Baruch atah Hashem, you God. I'm not sitting just in a library reading a book. But I'm learning for you, God. You're giving me the Torah. So the Jew who sins rejects Sinai, rejects the Torah of Sinai. Yom Kippurim is dedicated primarily to reacceptance the Torah of Sinai. That's the vidui. We're sorry. We're going to try to do better. Reaccepting the Torah. But it's not enough to reaccept the Torah of Sinai. We have to re-undergo the experience of Sinai. And the experience of Sinai is sensing the presence of God. And as we say, how did God make his presence known? At Mount Sinai, but kol shofar hafata, you made your presence known with the sound of the shofar. So we blow the shofar to re-undergo that experience of Sinai, of sensing the presence of God. In a sense, tshuva is the idea of tshuva is the idea of re-undergoing Kabbalah Satorah. If the Kabbalah is a Torah mutav, it's not just talking about Mount Sinai, it's talking now. We have an opportunity to re-accept the Torah. It will be good if we re-accept the Torah. It'll be good for us. If not, Sham there will be for us. We have to re-accept the Torah. It's for la'avodav. It's easy to say, Nasa v'nishma. Sometimes if we just say, Nasa v'nishma, and then we encounter a test, and we don't have the la'avodav, and even the lower form of la'avodav, the upper form of la'avodav goes without saying. So we disintegrate, our commitment disintegrates. The reason punishment was necessary is because in order to offset desire that would lead us otherwise astray. So it's for la'avodav. This Sedra, which is always at least 2 weeks before, 2 weeks, Tichla Shana v'Kiloseha, the year should go out with the curses that took place in that year. That chas v'shalom, that the year was cursed. And I remember reading a thought from one of the Kaliner Rebbeim in the last Rosh Hashanah, the last mincha of the year. We say, Uvarech shenasenu kashonim hatovos. Bless this year like the good years. The whole year passed by. And unfortunately, there were such terrible things that happened. But who knows? At the last minute, when there are just a couple minutes left, Uvarech shenasenu kashonim hatovos. Bless our years like the good years. We're asking there is Baruch Aleinu. We're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us sustenance. It's v'la'avadav. Baruch Shenasenu. There were some unfortunate things that happened. But we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not just Tichla Shana v'Kulosah, let the year go out with the curses that took place on that year. But Baruch Shenasenu Kashanim Matovos, please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, let us have an immediate Hatzalah. Immediate Hatzalah doesn't mean to put ourselves in added danger for the future, as some of the left-wing Jews are advising, as some politicians who claim to be friends of the Jews, and as some politicians who say that Israel has a right to defend itself, but they have to make a ceasefire now. You can defend yourself, but don't use force when you do it. That's not Baruch Shenasenu Kashanim Hatovos. This year will be blessed. Even in the last minutes, if a peace can be achieved that will eliminate the dangers for future years as well. Otherwise, we're just going to have a repeat of the same situation. This week, this is the we can't lane Savo any closer to Rosh Hashanah, but we always do lane it shortly before Rosh Hashanah, because the idea of Rosh Hashanah is it's a reacceptance of the Torah. And when we reaccept the Torah, we have to reaccept it both ways. Na'aseh b'nishma, and also recognition. Im tekablu as a Torah mutav. If you accept the Torah, it'll be good. V'im lav, if not, shamtei for aschem. That will have unfortunate circumstances otherwise. Let this year be a year. Baruch Shenasenu, this year should turn into a good year. And certainly from the beginning, next year should be a good year.
If anyone has a question, please put it in the chat. Okay, this is an easy answer. What's the source that all four parshios for the tefillin were revealed in Mitzrayim before they left Mitzrayim?
I think it's quoted in the name of the Rashba.
The Tosos Rashba and Menachos.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Rameir Dun Palatsky and maybe in Veschanan has something about it.
He also says that.
No, I don't think he says it, but he has a discussion about it. Yeah. But the Machon Yerushalayim Otzma Forshei Torah for Bo has a whole bunch of sources similar to that, or discusses that issue of the Rashba.
Okay, that's good. I'll have to take a look. Okay.
I didn't send it to you before?
No.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like looks like that's it. So thank you everyone for joining in. Thank you, Rabbi, for the share. Have a good week, everyone.
Okay.